Okay, so it's 11 o'clock, and just in the interest of all of your time that you're taking out from work today to join us, and we'll just make a start. So just to say hello to everybody and welcome to our first webinar for 2023 out of a planned, hopefully 9 to 10 webinars over the course of the year. My name is Angela Teisel. I'm the lead for Open Disclosure in the HSE and manager of the National Open Disclosure Office, which sits within the incident management team of the National Quality and Patient Safety Directorate. Just maybe to give you some of the background to the webinars and the purpose of them. So really, I suppose the purpose of these webinars is really just to maintain communication with you all in relation to open disclosure and keep the importance of open disclosure high on all of our agendas. But most of all, to provide continuous support to all of you in the system in the, the implementation of the HSE Open Disclosure Policy, but also to help you when you're engaging in these important discussions with patients and their families and loved ones. So just in relation to our speaker today, Lorraine will introduce her properly, but we're delighted to have Professor Eva Doherty back with us today for her third webinar, and backed by very popular demand, I must say, because our webinars are always so enjoyable. So Lorraine will tell you a bit more about Eva in a couple of moments. So just a few housekeeping things for today, really, before we start and get into the meat of the conversation today. So this session is being recorded, and you can leave your video turned off and remain muted, but please do use the chat function to engage with us. Let us know where you're from, and if you have any comments or any questions, just put all those into the chat, and we'll be doing the questions and answers at the end of Eva's presentation. There is telephone dial-in details if your sound is poor, and you'll see the number there on the screen, but also it'll be in the chat as well. Just moving on there, Catherine. So this session today is CPD accredited from the RCPI to CPD points, and we are awaiting confirmation of the CEUs from the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland. And just to say very importantly that this accreditation applies to attend the live webinar only. So if you do watch the recording, the CPD does not apply afterwards. So if you want a certificate for your CPD, please email the Open Disclosure Office at opendisclosure.office@hsc.ie. Okay, so I'll hand you over to Lorraine now, who's going to introduce our very important speaker today. So over to you, Lorraine. Thank you all and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Angela. Just to echo Angela's sentiment there, we're absolutely delighted that Professor Eva Doherty has joined us today, that she's giving up her time. She's really an expert in the field. So just to give you a little bit of background about Eva. Professor Eva Doherty, she's a chartered clinical psychologist and she's still practicing. She is the director of the Human Factors and Patient Safety Training for surgical, ophthalmology, emergency medicine and radiology trainees in the National Surgical Training Centre at the RCSI. Eva originally joined RCSI as a clinical psychologist and lecturer in the Department of Psychology in the late 80s, and then she moved to the Graduate School of Medicine in 2006 and the National Surgical Training Centre Department of Surgical Affairs in 2009. In 2010, she introduced a new academic Master of Science in Human Factors and Patient Safety, which is now an interdisciplinary online postgraduate diploma master's program, which is very successful and a lot of positive feedback from students who enroll in that course. She has 30 years experience teaching at both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels at the RCSI, and her vision or objectives are really that she strives to build healthcare professionals' resilience and to enable them to deliver patient-centered care. She is the Irish representative for the International Association of Communication in Healthcare and co-chair of the advisory committee of this organisation. She is also a chartered and associate fellow member of the Psychological Society of Ireland and a member of the Communications and Media panel. She is also a chartered member and an associate fellow of the British Psychological Society and a principal fellow of Advanced HE, which is formerly a higher education academy in the UK. Aoife conducts a great deal of research in many aspects of communication and healthcare, and she's the chair of the Respond Committee and advisor of the National Healthcare Communication Programme of the HSE. And we're absolutely delighted that she's taken the time out to do this webinar for us, where she'll be focusing on managing difficult conversations, getting it right when things go wrong. I'll hand over to you, Aoife.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for that absolutely super introduction. My face is burning with listening to it all. And I'm absolutely so happy to be invited back to give you this talk. And this is now part 3. We started off with part 1, and then I was invited back for part 2, and now we've got part 3. And so this presentation is going to focus on those oh so difficult conversations that you may have to have when something goes wrong, and how can you get that right. And I'm a really firm believer in skilling our healthcare professionals up with really expert communication skills, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes as to why I think that's so important for your well-being as well as for your performance. Okay, so Lorraine mentioned there all the programs that we have, so I won't go into it again. There's a list there, but just some of you might be interested in our academic program, because that is one which is open to many of you, whereas the other programs that we run are, you know, for mainly for our doctors. We collaborate a lot with the College of Anaesthetists, and we love having nurses as participants in our high fidelity sim programs as well. So if there are any perioperative or emergency medicine nurses out there who'd like to get involved, let us know. In terms of what I want to achieve for today, I really want to look at the key skills for communication in healthcare. And I've talked about these in previous presentations, but I'm just going to refresh them because I'm mindful of the fact that some of you mightn't have been at those presentations. But do, you know, if I whet your appetite at all, do go and have a look at them in more detail. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to identify the particular ones that are important to use for open disclosure conversations. And of course, an open disclosure conversation, you know, can range from, you know, a really, really severe and serious patient safety incident back down to something which maybe you might not regard as serious, but of course for the person it is going to be. And then I'm going to talk about the skills that you can use to help you with strong emotions, because I think we can be avoidant of that and afraid of other people's emotions and not really sure what to do, what to say, and how to cope. And then very specifically, I want to go into the ASSIST model. And if you haven't heard of it, don't worry, I'll explain what those letters stand for. And then specifically what's known as the Assist Me model, and, you know, what is that about? Okay. So, sorry now. It was moving on for me and now it's not.
Eva, it might be good just to stop sharing and share again. Maybe that might just resolve it for you.
Is that right? Okay. No problem. Because it was going fine. Okay. No, not happy with that. There we go. Okay, so I really just want to make the point, and those of you who've been at my presentation before might or might not remember this slide, but it's my favorite study, even though it was published in 2014, but it's such fantastic, super evidence because it's a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, and you really can't get any better than that. And especially when you think that this is of, you know, the nature and the quality of the patient-clinician relationship and the communication skills. It's a pretty unique report. And essentially what you see there speaks for itself. But if you look at the table on the left, the outcomes on the right-hand side they're all really important outcomes, aren't they? And essentially what this meta-analysis was able to show, that these things improved solely because of the nature of the patient-clinician relationship and the skills that the clinician was using to facilitate that. And that is just, this is the best evidence that we have, although I'll tell you about a great book which deals in that in more detail. And then if you look at the table there up at the top right-hand corner, that for those of you in the know and familiar with these kinds of statistics, this is called a forest diagram. Essentially, it's presenting us in quite an easy way to understand the sizes of the effects. So like, it's one thing to say that there is an effect, it's another thing to kind of look at how big is that effect. And I think, and anything to the right of the middle line there is statistically significant. And what's really amazing, I think, is that last one down at the bottom. That's the weight loss study. And it's quite something, isn't it, to think that communication skills is having such a significant effect over and above anything else we can offer patients. So I leave that with you. The other thing that is amazing, and again, we only have this evidence in the last number of years, is that skilling people up with communication skills actually leads to improvements in their well-being and reduces their burnout. Who knew? And again, like, these are really impressive journals. They don't publish things unless they are really robust studies and well conducted. So we now know, we've often thought it, but we didn't know for sure, that skilling people up with these communication skills actually contributes to lower burnout scores, better well-being. If you think about it, it makes totally sense. If you have the skills to have a conversation, make it go better for you, that of course is going to lead to better work satisfaction and better well-being. And I think it speaks to the myth that is still out there, that, I was having this conversation with somebody only last week, that I think a lot of healthcare people think that they're too busy, the services are crazy, everything's chaotic. They certainly don't have time for communicating. And actually, that is, a myth, because in fact, if they did take what in essence is only a couple of seconds to use some of these communication skills, not only would it lead to all these improved outcomes, but it would make their lives better as well within the chaos. There's a great TED talk, if you want to look at this a bit further, called 40 Seconds. Stephen Tresiak, who is also the author of the book I'm going to tell you about. But if you go into YouTube and put in 40 seconds, it'll pop up, because that's all that's needed. Okay, so to start off this particular discussion and conversation we're going to have today about open disclosure, I'm going to play you a video that I made with Bernie a number of years ago. And Bernie, I've heard that you're here, and I'm so delighted that you are here. And your generosity in telling us your story just knows no bounds. And I have used this video so much in my teaching, and I'm so grateful to have it. And you speak from the heart, and thank you so much. And as I say, you've been so generous to let me have free use of this. And, I will warn everybody that, this is tough to hear. And so if anybody thinks that they're not able for it, maybe you'd like to, come back to us in about 5 minutes. But it is hard to hear. And as I say, Bernie's speaking to us from her heart here. And this was made when Bernie was starting up really in her role as a patient representative and advocate. And she's taken on a lot of, thank you, Bernie. I see your thing coming in the chat. And she's taken on a lot of important roles since, and this was at the very beginning. So I'm just going to play it now, and it will speak for itself.
My husband died 9 years ago from sepsis following a medical misadventure. Initially, I felt the staff in the hospital. It showed empathy towards me and my family. And I definitely felt that the staff in intensive care were excellent. Within a month of my husband's death, when I went to meet the consultant, I felt that he was evasive and that I wasn't getting the honesty that I felt initially I was going to get. By the time we got to my husband's inquest, I definitely felt we were on totally different sides, that we all arrived with legal representation, and I just felt that any chance of total honesty or open disclosure was just not part of the scenario. I didn't quite know how to handle the situation, and I did go the legal route for a while, but I actually, in the end, I just felt that was futile as well. So when the statute of limitation expired on our legal case, I wrote to the Minister for Health and I asked her, could she look into what had happened? And 2 years later, I got contact from the HSE advising me that they were going to undertake an external review. And it was really through that external review that most of the answers to my questions were satisfied. When I asked the consultant a month after my husband's death if he would do anything differently, he said no, and I just felt that was the wrong answer. I just thought that there has to be learning from the death of a young person, and I felt that if you don't acknowledge mistakes are made, how can you learn from them? And I just thought it was such a missed opportunity. I felt that because I had a strong sense that the surgeon himself was some way being influenced by people outside of the medical profession. Like I felt that maybe insurance people or other third parties had influenced the amount of information he was prepared to divulge to me. And even now, 9 years later, I still feel that I have questions that I might never get the answers to. I think it's a pity that open disclosure wasn't available to me at the very outset. If people are totally honest with you at the outset, when they've got total recollection of an event which is fresh in their minds, you've got a much better chance of being told the honest truth. And I felt as time went on, everybody's recall of what actually had happened was clouded and influenced. And I think that's really why 9 years on, I haven't come to terms with how my husband died. I've come to terms with being widowed and the fact that my husband is no longer part of my life. But I have not come to terms with how he died and the lack of honesty and respect afforded my family. Really, in the actual trauma of our grief, it actually prolonged my grief. I welcome open disclosure, and I think it's down to it's honesty. Like open disclosure is your own honesty. And if it's not part of your core, like it has to be part of your professional integrity. Honesty is such a core principle.
So I think it says it all, and what always moves me when I listen to this is how Bernie says that, you know, that while she has got to a certain place about having lost Tony, you know, the memory of how it was handled and the lack of honesty still stays with her. And I think that's why we have to have open disclosure, because it's tough enough for people to lose their loved ones. That's one thing. But for it not to be managed right and communicated right, just adds to the pain. So thank you, Bernie. So what I'm going to do now is I have a recipe on my next slide, which is a recipe of all the skills that need to be used. And I've gone into these in more detail in my other talks, my previous 2 talks, and they're up on the website, but I'm going to pick up on some of them, as again, I'm mindful that not all of you have heard the other 2 talks. So what is this recipe, if you like? What is it that, you know, definitely should not be omitted when you're trying to have these really hard conversations? Okay, so here it is. Number 1, say who you are. It is amazing how this is still not happening in our healthcare services. People are still not introducing themselves with both their names. My family were in an Irish hospital lately, and I can attest to that. It's still not happening. The next most important thing to do is, and this is not intuitive, this is not what we normally do in our normal everyday communicating, is to identify where your other person, your family members, where are they coming from? What is what we call their starting point? Ask them. What do you understand? What have you been told so far? And then let them speak without interruptions, and we will come back to that. Another really, really important skill which I'm going to pick up on is the use of empathy and apology, and specifically for open disclosure when something's gone wrong. And empathy, just to say this now, is not the same as sympathy. It is an exercise, if you like, on disclosing that you can see what other people are feeling. You don't have to be feeling the same thing. And in fact, I think, you know, there's evidence that that actually would make you burnt out if you were to sympathize with everybody. It's not the same. The use of open and closed questioning, again, tell me more about that. Tell me about what you've just said. Tell me more. Screening questions. What else would you like to know about? What else? What else? And again, all of these skills, although intuitively you might think they're going to take more time, the evidence is now overwhelming that the use of these skills leads to shorter conversations, not longer. It's totally counterintuitive. The use of signposting, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. Making sure that you're tuned into the non-verbal side of communicating. We'll talk about that in a second. Making sure that you use simple language. If you find yourself using a jargon word, that you explain it. Summarizing the conversation all along the way, and checking for people's understanding. And then finally, something which very rarely happens is summarizing and what we call safety netting. So putting in a kind of a, if this happens, then we'll do that. If that happens, then we'll do this. If this happens, give us a ring here, whatever it might be. So they are, if you like, would you believe that the evidence indicates that there are actually 75 different micro skills of communication? But I think for a talk like today, 75 skills would be ridiculous. So what I've done is I've picked, if you like, the most salient, the most important ones not to omit, as I say. Okay, let's look at some of these specifically. So signposting is a bit of a jargon word in communication world, but really what it is about is it's about letting somebody know why you're telling them what you're telling them. What is your motivation? So why are you ringing them up? Why are you having this conversation? And doing that all through the conversation. So now I'm going to explain how the procedure is going to be done. Or now I'm going to explain to you the medication, you know, your father was on, or whatever it is. And one of those really important signposting skills, and it's got a specific name, and it's called warning shot. And this is where you give people a warning when you think you're going to say something that they don't expect. This is really crucial in an open disclosure conversation, because it's quite likely that there's a lot of things you're going to have to explain that the person is not expecting. And so they need a warning shot, need to be told, look, what I'm going to explain to you next is probably what you're not expecting. And is it okay if I continue? So that's signposting. Another one, and we spoke about this in a previous talk, is the importance of remembering how crucial our non-verbal skills are. It may surprise some of you that in terms of conveying meaning, the words we use are only responsible for 7% of the meaning, whereas our tone of voice and our body language are contributing to 93% of the meaning we convey. That's why we put emojis in all our messages, because we have a sixth sense that the words are not conveying the meaning properly. And that's why it's so easy to misinterpret an email or a text message, because you don't know the tone, you don't know the body language. So nonverbal skills are crucial to keep in mind. Another set of skills which are crucial is this idea of continually summarizing and going back over and asking the person to tell you what they understand, and that's what we call teach back. And it's this idea of what we call chunk and check. So a little bit of information, then take a pause and check to see how people are interpreting what you're saying. Can you tell me what you've understood from what I've explained so far? And on that point, although a lot of people will feel defensive, it's actually a very good thing to do, to take a recording of the conversation and to allow the family to do the same. And I've got that from the State Claims Agency's legal team. That's a very good thing to do because it cuts across any chances of misinterpretation. Now, empathy is so crucial, and I go into this a lot in the previous talks. It is the art of demonstrating that you get the emotion behind what is being expressed. So you can see what someone is feeling. So it's very important to differentiate the difference between feelings and thoughts. Feelings are things like anger and sadness and fear. Thoughts are, I can't believe what I'm hearing, this is awful, my husband wasn't looked after properly. They're all thoughts. Emotions are different. They are what we feel physically in our bodies. It's often called the elephant in the room, especially the emotion anger. I've often noticed when I train people that they find themselves in an angry scenario or situation, and they don't empathize with that, and they don't say, I can see you're really annoyed. I can see you're really angry. However, when you name it, it really does calm things down and reassures the other person that you're listening and you get what they're feeling and you get how it's affecting them. So it's really crucial to do. So it's about naming and demonstrating respect for the emotion. I can see this is difficult for you. I can see this delay is very frustrating. I can see this is so, so upsetting. That's how you demonstrate empathy. Now, when we come to open disclosure, and Angela and I have spoken about this and the team lots of times, the problem with an open disclosure conversation is that you are going to be emotionally involved yourself. And we're going to look at this. But I have always said that I believe that an open disclosure conversation is actually the black slope of communication. So a black slope for all the skiers there, they're probably off skiing at the moment because it's midterm. But a black slope is obviously the hardest slope to go down. And I think an open disclosure conversation is the hardest conversation to have because you're going to be emotionally involved. You're upset. You're afraid. You're frustrated. Any combination of those emotions, you're actually feeling them. And in fact, it is the wisdom out there that if you are really emotional and really you know, overwhelmed by your feelings, you might not be the best person to have the open disclosure conversation with the patient or the family. And that should really be discussed with colleagues to figure out who's the best person, what's the best combination. And I like to draw a distinction between breaking bad news, which is BBN there, and open disclosure, because I think breaking bad news is recognized by us all to be a hard conversation, and open disclosure is even harder. And I think it's for these reasons. In a breaking bad news conversation, the clinician is not necessarily going to feel responsible for, the advance of the person's disease. Whereas in the open disclosure conversation, the clinician is going to feel a sense of responsibility most times. In a breaking bad news conversation, there isn't the fear of litigation or an investigation most of the time, whereas that is going to be a fear being felt by people in an open disclosure conversation. In a breaking bad news conversation, the person isn't going to feel that they're to blame, the clinician, whereas there is going to be a fear of blame in an open disclosure conversation. In a breaking bad news conversation, oftentimes there may not be an effective treatment available. And in an open disclosure conversation, the problem is that there's often no quick fixes, there's no solutions, there's no treatments. And the strong emotions, actually, that's common to both. I shouldn't have that, there's a difference, just spotting that now. But they are both very emotional conversations. Okay, just looking at the impact of emotions on us for a minute, and again, we go into this in the other talks, but just to refresh, the problem here is that when we feel these emotions, we get very strong impulses to behave in certain ways, and we have to, kind of repress them, hold them back when we're having an open disclosure conversation. So if we're feeling really angry in the situation, that's going to trigger us and put us into fight mode. And again, we're going to have to repress that and hold that back in order to be able to be professional and to have a professional conversation or conversations. If we're feeling disgust, which you could imagine we could well be, that's going to trigger us to reject the source of that disgust. And again, we're going to have to hold back on that. If we feel fear, that triggers us and puts us into avoidance mode. So the last thing we might want to do is to have to face the family or the patient. And yet that is now what we have to do. And we simulate this in the college all the time, and when we're teaching this topic, and they will tell us about that. It's kind of the last thing they wanted was to have to go and have the conversations. You're going to have to kind of fight against these impulses. If you're feeling sad and upset, you just feel like giving up. If you're surprised and shocked, that is actually our attention-seeking instinct. Now that can serve us well, but it can also derail us because we may be paying attention to the wrong thing. So we have to be careful there. And then I just put in the final emotion, just if you're wondering what all the emotions are. A happy emotion puts us into explorative mood, but obviously we're not going to feel happy in an open disclosure conversation. Okay, so essentially the message here is that when we are having the hardest of all conversations, it is about using these communication skills that I've just gone through, that recipe, but you use them with greater emphasis. You spend more time on them. You make sure that you can definitely tick the box that you've definitely done so. So you pay, you pay a lot of attention to your introduction. You pay a lot of attention to identifying the person's starting point. You pay a lot of attention to your demonstration of empathy. And just like these individuals in these pictures, they have to use their basic skills that they learned from early on. They use those skills with greater attention to get themselves out of the harder scenarios. So that is the basic premise. It isn't a different set of skills, it is the same set of skills. Okay, so now we're going to jump straight into the assist model. And I think this is the most useful framework to have in your minds if you're in this scenario, because it's so helpful. It comes from the Medical Protection Society, the HSE policy. Angela and her co-authors wisely adopted this framework for use in the HSE policy. And it really is a super, if you like, reminder of what needs to be done when you're having these kinds of conversations. Okay, so what do all these letters stand for? And I'm going to go into them in detail. So the first one is acknowledge. And, you know, that might sound obvious, but to actually have it acknowledge that something has happened is so important. And people can, you know, it can be years before they get this acknowledgement or feel that they've got it, this acknowledgement. If you say, the second S is to say sorry. I'm sorry that this has happened. And this is quite a tricky concept sometimes for people, and we'll talk about it in more detail. The other thing is to encourage the other person, the patient or the family, to tell you their story. It's not about your story. It's not so much about what, you know, your side of what's happened. It's so important that the patient or the family or both are given time to tell their story. You need to inquire, this is what the I stands for, as to what they think should happen next or what might ease things for them. You will be surprised what they will come up with. They will know. Offer solutions when the time is right. We'll say that, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And then the last T stands for travel, and it means to stay in touch and support them through the coming years. And we'll talk about each of those in turn. Okay, so what way does this look like in practice? And the feedback I'm going to give you, if you like, on each of these are based on, you know, not anything that I've read actually. They're based on my learning, teaching this topic over the years with Angela in the college. Angela and her team have come into us on quite a number of occasions, are always so valuable and so welcome. And I have made observations over the years as to what is really challenging for people with these conversations. Okay, let's look at the first one, acknowledge. It's very hard emotionally because you're maybe in denial yourself. Because when we feel a strong emotion, often for many of us, our reaction to that will be to deny. So it's really important that you figure out what you're feeling, give it a name. What am I feeling? Am I feeling annoyed? Am I feeling afraid? What are my impulses, my instincts? You know, do I want to go into avoidance mode? Am I feeling defenseless? Am I feeling helpless? Do I want to give up? And it's important to identify these so you can get in control and get in command of them and be in the driver's seat. After you acknowledge what has happened and that something has happened, and that is the warning shot as well, it's really important to pause. I often notice that in people's earnest to, you know, get it out and get it all off their chest, they speak too fast, they don't pause. Pauses are so effective. They're hard to get used to. People don't like silences, but they are so effective. And be ready with your apology. And we're going to talk about this. Sorry cannot be said enough times, and followed then by another pause. Okay, so that's acknowledge. Sorry. We know many studies of, would you believe, simulated open disclosure scenarios have shown that in a simulation, never mind in real life, 50% of the clinicians do not apologize or mention the word mistake. And we see this time and time again. There's something in us that, you know, stops us saying sorry and stops us acknowledging that there's been a mistake. And I think in a blame culture, that is accentuated. And of course, that's another conversation. But open disclosure really can only be effective in a culture where there isn't blame. Saying sorry does not mean that it's your fault. You can say sorry that something has happened. That doesn't mean it was your fault. Now make sure you're well advised, if necessary, from your management team, your legal team regarding the forms. I decided I'm not going to go into that. Angela is the best expert and her team on that. I'm just going to talk about it purely from the communication perspective. However, ensure the truth is the priority. The honesty, as Bernie was talking about. Because we do know all over the world that complaints and legal claims are the family's response to feeling that there's been a cover-up. When they get honesty and openness, they are much less likely to follow it with a complaint or a legal claim. And that is a fact now, if you like. The evidence about that is, as they say, saturated. So in terms of inviting the patient and the patient's family to tell you the story, it's important to let them have the time to do that, but it can be difficult because the family may not have access to all the facts that you have. And you may hear them saying things that you know aren't factually correct. So it's really hard not to interrupt there or correct them. But it is important that you let them have their time to tell their story, and then you'll be able to inquire from them later on as to whether they would like to hear in more detail about some of what they think. And some of them will be ready for that, and some of them will not be ready for that right now. And that may take a while. But empathy here is so crucial. You know, I can see how upset you are. I can see how angry you are. And sorry once more. Only move to this next stage, which is called inquire, when all the previous stages have had sufficient time. This can't be rushed, I'm afraid to say. Open disclosure conversations are going to take time. And making an inquiry about what would help you best for me at this point. They may be very angry and they may say, well, nothing, this has happened now and we're just so angry and upset that there's nothing to be done. However, it is important to put yourself in that situation and ask that question and to listen and respond to what they say. So if they don't want you to offer any particular help right now, that is what you respond to. Solutions. Offer solutions only when they're ready, and you will hear them ask you for solutions sometimes. They'll say something like, well, what happens now? Or what do we do now? Or what's next? Chunking and checking and seeking feedback almost after every sentence. Abandon the solutions they don't want. It's important not to try and persuade them to go down routes that they are not ready for or that they don't want. And of course, sorry cannot be said enough times. Travel. It's about not abandoning them. It's very tempting, once the conversations have ended, to kind of go, okay, that's that now, that's that awful situation, and I don't have to face that family again. You do. You have to keep up support most times with that family. They're going to need ongoing contact and support and follow up from you. There may be an official inquiry ahead. There may be a coroner's hearing. You need to get your own support, and that is available to you from the State Claims Agency. There is a legal helpline available 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And of course, these things often happen outside of office hours, but that is there for you. And then you'll have your own organizations too that you can get support from. Talking about support, let's move on to the other framework, which is called Assist Me. And I think this is so clever, because this is the exact same framework, but it's about supporting the healthcare professional rather than the patient or the family. Because we do know that you are what they call in the literature, you're going to be the second victim. This is now, there's there's a campaign out there now to kind of rename the second victim and to call it the second casualty, because you are a casualty of this. You are going to be upset too. And whereas it might not be your family member who perhaps has died or has been seriously injured, at the same time, you are going to be upset. And we know it causes huge trauma for people, where they can't sleep, they can suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder, huge impact on individuals. And so this framework Assist Me is again a checklist for you if you're in the situation where you are supporting people who find themselves in that situation. So number one, acknowledge that something has happened. Might sound straightforward, but it's not always, because it can actually take a bit of self-awareness to kind of go, ooh, you know, this has happened for Mary or John or whatever it is, and we need to sit down and talk about it, and we need to see, you know, how they are. I'm sorry this has happened. You may not have even been in the hospital or the primary care center, or, you know, wherever the care is being delivered. You may not have even been there that day, but it is so reassuring for people to hear that you're feeling the sorry that this has happened to them. Again, they need to tell their story. They need to give you their version of what has happened. And also it's important that you don't interrupt them, that you let them have their say, even though you might be thinking, well, did you not know? Or did you not see? Or why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? Ask them, inquire, ask them what they think should happen next, or what might ease things. Offer solutions when they are ready, and check, do they have solutions? And again, travel and stay with them. Don't abandon them, support them through the coming years. And then finally, monitor closely to see, are they coping okay? And it's very interesting, this one, because we know a lot more about this in the literature since 9/11 as psychologists, and we know that it's not about, you know, forcing everybody to go and have discussion groups and, you know, debriefing sessions. What is much, because that can actually make people worse. What's actually much more valuable is to keep an eye on people, just monitor them, see, are they coping okay? Everybody's going to cope in a different way. And if someone looks like they're not coping, that's when you can go in with the possibility of psychological first aid, as it's called, and support. And then make sure that it all is drawn to a closure at some point, no matter how long ahead, you know, that may be, to support the person. Now, in terms of supports, I thought it would be useful for those of you who want to do a little bit of work on what's out there to help you if this happens. The Open Disclosure website, the HSE Open Disclosure website, has so much information. I think you would nearly, you know, have everything you need there. And on top of that, they have 2 e-learning programs available on HSE land, which are absolutely brilliant. Do watch them. So there's lots of information there. The other support I want to tell you about is our own National Healthcare Communication Programme. They have a super website also, with lots and lots and lots of handouts and pointers and videos. And if you get to hear of any of their courses running either online or in your healthcare organization, go and do them, because they are 100% brilliant. Winnie Ryan and Peter Gillen, surgeon from the college, run absolutely super courses on these communication skills. That's their new website, which has all kinds of resources there. On top of that, some of you may have to have these disclosure conversations, because there's all kinds of disclosure, isn't there? You know, from telling somebody that a test has been lost right up to something much more serious. And having telephone and video conversations can be very difficult because you're missing out on a lot of the cues. So we have these 2 open access courses that you can do about how do you communicate on the phone and how do you communicate on video. And for those of you who are interested, it's not directly relevant, but there's a really good course on handover conversations as well. And that's a resource that's there for you. That'll just maybe entice you to do some of these courses because they are so well done and so practical. This is the international organization that Lorraine referred to. I'm a passionate member of this organization. We need more and more members to join us. It's €120, I think, to join, and you can become part of the community to advocate for better communication in healthcare. We'd love to have you. We're a very friendly, lovely organization, and we do courses and events and all kinds of things, and we have a whole resource section to help as well. And these are my 2 favorite reads. This book on the left is Jonathan Silverman. It's my Bible. It's not the kind of book that you need to read from beginning to end, but if you want to become really expert in your communicating, this is the book for you. And the one on the right is the one I was referring to earlier on. It's called Compassionomics, the revolutionary scientific evidence that caring makes a difference, written by Stephen Tresiak and Anthony Mazzarelli. It's a great read. It's so interesting. It's really well laid out, and it just dispels all the myths. And you'll get these books on all the usual. I don't want to advertise a particular source, but all the usual book supplies websites will have them, both our own local ones and more international ones. They're not difficult books to get. Thanks, Grania, for asking that. I saw it popping up. And here's a QR code just in case any of you are interested in our postgrad program where we go into this in lots more detail. And so I thought I might finish there, and if that's okay, Angela, and we can use the rest of the time for any discussion or questions.
Thank you so much, Eva. That was just a fantastic presentation again. And just to let you know, we have almost 550 attendees, 550 attendees on the webinar today. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming into the chat in a moment. So and just to say thank you to Bernie again, because every time I see that video, it just nearly brings me to tears every time, you know. So it's just such an emotive video and so honest, and really brings the message of open disclosure home to us all. So thank you to Bernie. I know you're there listening to us today. So just a question for myself, really, Eva, first of all, in relation to, you mentioned that 50% of your doctors don't apologise when you do your simulation discussions. Is there anything that comes up in the conversation afterwards to explain why, or, you know, why does they find that difficult to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that statistic actually comes from American research, so it's not one that we research directly, but we do see it. Now, funny enough, because, you know, we emphasize this so much, the hope is that the people who go through our training programs will say sorry and will talk about mistakes. I think it's a natural human instinct not to say sorry and not to acknowledge a mistake. You know, and I think if we're working in a culture where there is a lot of blame, I think that is even more so the case. And this is not just individual to healthcare. You know, there are many cultures out there in various industries. You know, the aviation industry, the oil industry, the space industry. That was, you know, that was the same issue, you know, for some of their disasters, where if there is, even in the Google, the famous Aristotle project, which people can look up if they're interested, the best and most high performing teams were the ones who felt a sense of psychological safety. They were actually the best teams, and this is what we need to have more in our healthcare environments is a high degree of psychological safety, and that comes down to our leadership. I try and model that myself as a leader. I try and be humble and curious, and I self-regulate my emotions when something goes wrong, and you know, I kind of keep a lid on you know, my impulses, and I recognize them, and I go, okay, let's look at this, and let's look at what's gone wrong. And then people are much more likely to own up to mistakes and to apologize if they feel that psychological safety.
Thanks, Eva. And just a question from the chat. How do I manage a situation wherein I'm advocating for a good conversation or trying to get honest and satisfactory answers for a patient or loved one's questions, but I've hit a wall with the medical team. I cannot answer medical questions as I have no clinical background, but want to help as much as I can.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's such a hard scenario. I mean, I think it's probably going to be, if, you know, in truth, I don't know where this person is working, but it's probably a situation where something like that needs to be escalated up, you know, further up, to try and find somebody who is on the same hymn page as yourself, who does value the importance of open disclosure. I mean, this is HSE policy. I mean, that is, you know, that's the sort of, it stops there. And if any members of any you know, healthcare discipline, you know, are balking at rolling that out and doing that properly, I think that has to be escalated in the same way that you would about anything else. If you feel like your management or your leadership doesn't support you, well, that's a very hard situation to be in. And I'm sorry that the person's in that situation, that they actually, maybe they can't get support from the highest levels.
And I think some of the advice we give in open disclosure training around that is to sometimes tease it out with the individuals involved, to kind of to tease out why it is that they don't want to engage in open disclosure. And sometimes it's a fear of the open disclosure conversation, and you know, maybe they haven't had training, a reminder about the importance of this HSE policy, and just maybe just to work with that individual, reminding them of their obligations under their code of professional conduct and ethics for doctors, for nurses, midwives, and healthcare professionals as well. So, and then if, you know, you're still not getting a satisfactory answer, you know, our duty of care is to our patient, and our duty of care is to make sure that open disclosure happens under the policy of the HSE. And, you know, we have legislation coming down the line now as well, which will enforce disclosure around some of these notifiable incidents as well. It is a difficult situation for staff, but again, I think, you know, tease it out, try and work with the person, establish why, and then if it's still an issue, then, you know, you can provide training for that person as well to kind of, as you say, to upskill them in being able to manage the conversation. So just another question, and it's, can you just crack on with an open disclosure conversation, or should you consult hospital risk management first, or legal advice first? And maybe I can answer this one, Eva, maybe. But our advice generally is that we, you know, if there is an open disclosure conversation, you know, an open disclosure meeting required, it's very helpful to link in with your risk management department to get some support and advice and some resource to help you with that. Some of the low-level open disclosures can be very easily managed on the ward or the unit, whatever unit the instance happened. But certainly for some of the higher level disclosure, we would say link in with your risk management department and QPS department, and they can help. Maybe Lorraine wants to come in there. Lorraine, do you?
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, you know, the QPS colleagues are always very supportive and very knowledgeable, but I think, just to echo a little bit what Bernie was saying, you know, it is about having that open and honest conversation, and it's about the facts that you know. So it's not something that you need to run by the legal team. It's very much within your gift and your responsibilities to have those open and honest conversations. I think the QPS colleagues, as Angela said, are always very well versed and experienced in that, and can support you and maybe can reflect on some of the practices that work well, and how to conduct those conversations. So that's more a support mechanism, but it's not something that you need to run by the legal team, certainly.
I think probably, if I can just say, is that we can't underestimate the emotional side of this. And I think that's what differentiates it from a lot of other difficult conversations, as I was saying. And, you know, when as human beings, when we're being swamped by emotions, it's very hard to see the wood for the trees. It's very hard to be logical and rational. And it, you know, in terms of that other question that came in, it could be that though, you know, those healthcare professionals are just so overwhelmed by fear and upset that that's actually what needs to be addressed. And it could be they're not the right ones to even have the conversation, because they might not be able to do it effectively because they're so emotional. You know, we can't underestimate you know, how, like, when our emotions are being felt really strongly, we are being hijacked. I might be being a little bit black and white about this, but we are essentially being hijacked by our limbic system. You know, if any of you read that book, The Chimp Paradox, you know, and that's not the cleverest bit of our brain. You know, we want our cortex to be in charge, not our limbic system. So our emotions have to settle before we can, you know, be logical and rational and effective.
I think Professor Lucien Leap talks about that as well. He was a surgeon and a lecturer, and he works in the area of patient safety. And he talks about, you know, that doctors, nurses, midwives, we all go to work every day with the best intention for our patients. And when something goes wrong, it's not in our being to, you know, to do something to do wrong by a patient. And it's very hard to accept that, you know, we've been involved in maybe an error or an incident at work. So that is very difficult. And sometimes, you know, he does talk about the ego thing, which can appear sensitive, but we haven't seen, I mean, much of that at all. And in fact, you know, we have great engagement across the whole of the system with open disclosure. We've rarely had any challenging situations to deal with, because people are totally engaged in this. And we know from, you know, 12 years of work now that people really want to do this now, and they want to do it well. And you know, our team are here to help people if they have got a difficult, maybe challenging disclosure that they have to manage. You can just, you know, contact our office, and we're very happily give advice. And we do go out on site on occasion to give some, you know, on-site coaching pre-disclosure meetings. So I think that not to underestimate that we do need help sometimes, because as you said, Eva, these are the most difficult conversations that we will engage in, likely. Just another question for you, Eva. In complaints, when you cannot provide what the complainant wants, how can you ease that situation, just using the communication skills?
Okay, so you have such an amazing tool in terms of your ability to demonstrate empathy. What I always say to our learners in the college is, empathy is your tool in your toolbox when you have nothing else to offer. When you can't undo something, you can't make something better, you can't make it go away. What you do have is your ability to show the person that you can see how hard this is for them, and how difficult and how frustrating and how tough. And you say that with genuineness. And I do believe I've never met a clinician ever in my life who is not well-meaning inside. The problem is they don't necessarily have access to the skills to demonstrate that. And so it's about demonstrating that you can see how absolutely awful this is, and how sorry you are that you can't supply for the family or the patient, you know, what they're asking. And you're really sorry about that. And you can see how hard it is. And that's what you rely on. You rely on your empathy skills. They really do matter. Never underestimate them. That's what that book, Compassionomics, is all about. It's all about the power of empathy, and it can literally move mountains.
Thank you very much, Eva. And just in relation to a question there, who initiates the open disclosure discussion? And I suppose I can answer that one as well, maybe. So it's for your low level type events where a patient has suffered maybe minimal or no harm, and you're the member staff involved. It's good to inform the person in charge of the unit at that time and decide together then who is going to conduct the open disclosure and conversation with the patient. And we generally say always to have a support person with you. So there's no reason why, you know, as a staff nurse can't engage in open disclosure with a patient, but it's always good to have a support person with you. But certainly for the higher level open disclosure meetings where there's been significant or moderate or a higher level of harm to the patient, it's the most responsible person involved in the care of that patient who would generally engage in the open disclosure discussion. So the most senior, it's usually the consultant or the most senior clinician, or maybe a manager if it is kind of an administrative type error in the system. Just here, interested in the recommendation re-recording. As medical staff always have a concern about this. Is there guidance on how long the recording is saved for and what device does the recording? So again,
I don't know about that, Angela, but I do know that the State Claims Agency have advocated in sessions we've had them in the college that there's nothing wrong with recording a conversation. I mean, there was super research done 30 years ago on patients with cancer, that it helps with their recovery and their adherence to treatment if the conversations are recorded. The advice from the State Claims Agency that I've heard, and you can add to this, Angela, I'm sure, is that, you know, you're totally entitled to record the conversation as well. You know, so you both can. But anyway, there might be something in a policy maybe about that, Angela, that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I mean, there is the general advice we give around recordings is really, it's the role of the designated person, and that's that key contact person who's maybe liaising with the patient or their family and helping them to prepare for the open disclosure meeting. So that if the patient or a relevant person decides that they want to record a discussion, to tease out with them really why they want to record the discussion and let them know that there will be written minutes of the meeting taken and made available to them after the meeting. And sometimes just to say that, you know, when you introduce a recording device, it can change the dynamic of the meeting somewhat, and people may not feel as open and as free to speak as they would normally would do. However, a patient, you know, if they really want to have recording, and very often they want to record because they know they won't remember everything that's said at the meeting. They want to go back and discuss that conversation with maybe family members. So you know, we would say best practice to allow that recording to happen, let everybody know what's going to happen, but also for the healthcare provider to record the session, or maybe that they say, listen, we'll record the session for you and provide the recording to you afterwards. There's a new record retention policy that's coming out very soon in relation to the retention of records. So I might hold off on answering how long we keep that recording for. What the advice that we had given that people would have the recording, type up the recording and then destroy the recording, but give the written you know, text or transcript to the patient afterwards. So I know there is a new policy coming out, so we might and I'm liaising with the team around that piece at the moment, so we might hold off on just giving a kind of number of years thing on that one.
I think generally in healthcare there's a whole move happening, and it'll happen, I think, in all of our career lifetimes, to record and video everything. Like they're already doing it in the operating theatres, they're doing it in the emergency departments in Canada. You know, it's like it's the black box idea of aviation. You know, it's something to be welcomed. It's not something to be afraid of. You know, would we be any different in a conversation? You know what I mean? Are there things that we would say that we wouldn't want to be recorded? Well, then we probably have to think about that. If yes is the answer.
Yeah, and I mean, really, what we say to people, you know, because somebody tells you they're recording, that's fine, but you may be recorded anyway without like you knowing you're recording. So we should be engaging in just the facts with patients. We shouldn't be speculating, you know, so it should be a very professional conversation that we're having. So I always say to people, assume you're being recorded, and that will keep you correct in relation to staying factual, you know, keeping the assumptions out of the conversation and speculation out of it as well. But also, like you just said, Eva, like a recording is good in that it records exactly what you said. It records how you said it, you know, your voice, your tone of voice, etc. And the MPS have always said, you know, that a recording can be very good for you as an individual because it gives the full story and can protect you. So And it's the same with solicitors. If a solicitor wants to come into an open disclosure meeting, that you can, tease that out with the patient again, ask why. And if a solicitor is going to be present in the meeting, it's just for a purely supportive reason for the patient, but it's not there. A solicitor won't be allowed to kind of cross-examine staff in any of those meetings, because the meeting is about the team communicating with the patient, not to expose their team to a cross-examination. And those things should be teased out. And this is why preparation for these open disclosure meetings are really so important. And just moving on, how long has the open disclosure team been disseminating information and training in the HSE? So the policy was launched in 2013, and our training program has been around before that in the pilot sites between 2010 2013. And we still have a very active training program. Our, as you said, Eva, our 2 online modules, and also we have a face-to-face training and also a trainer program. So if you have staff in your service who want to train as a trainer, just email the Open Disclosure Office on opendisclosure.office@hse.ie, and we can arrange to get staff trained up so they can deliver that training for you locally. I think maybe that was all of the questions. People said they loved the analogy between Breaking Bad News and open disclosure. And I think that when we were developing the program initially, we did work with the Breaking Bad News team, and we attended their training, and they attended our training. So we're bringing in all that concept around, the same principles of Breaking Bad News that you use in open disclosure. So that was actually very helpful in the earlier days of the program development. Let me just see, is there anything else here?
Somebody was asking, I see a few more questions coming in, but somebody was asking about the monkey book. So it's called The Chimp Paradox.
Okay.
It's a good read.
Great. And another question, a mistake can also give rise to a questioning of one's ability, coupled with shame and disbelief, and that has to be extremely difficult. I think you've talked about that already, Eva, but do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, and I think it's up to us, those of us in leadership positions, we've got to jump in and support people. I think one of the things that people talk about when they find themselves, having been at the sharp end, as they say, of something going wrong, a patient safety incident, is everybody avoids them. Nobody wants to talk to them. It's kind of like, oh goodness, did you hear what happened to Eva? Oh, and and so we tend to kind of want to keep away. And so, as I say, those of us in the leadership positions, we've got to be proactive there and approach the individual and keep the assist me model and sit down with the person and go through all those steps in however long it takes. We might even only get through the first day in the first conversation. You might not necessarily get it all done in one, but that you make sure that you work your way through that framework with the person, and in doing that you're helping them then to have to go and do the awful difficult conversation that they're going to have, or a couple of conversations they're going to have with the patient and the family. So like it's a 360 thing, if you like. It's not just up to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Eva. And just another comment here. I like the link made in the chat between Schwartz rounds and the one-to-one open disclosure conversation. So do we need more practice opportunities in working together with the emotional burden and joys of the role to be able to manage the difficult open disclosure conversations? And thank you for a great presentation and discussion from the same person. So,
well, now it's funny that you say that, because I'm running a webinar which you may all attend if you wish, and there will be a recording of it. And so it's the president of the college, so the president of the RCSI is holding a webinar which I'm chairing next Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock, and the title of it is called Prioritizing Conversations About the Emotional Impact of Work in Healthcare. And we will be going into this whole topic, and we'll be talking about using the idea of a round to support people in that process. So do join in. You'll find the link to it on, if you put in RCSI prioritizing conversations, it should pop up. You're on mute, Angela.
Sorry, perfectly, but I said maybe we might get that link from you and send it around in our post-webinar
Sure.
information sent out afterwards, maybe. Probably, oh yeah, is to protect the time for medical staff to be trained in open disclosure? And I suppose I can answer that one myself. That is really down to local management. It's to kind of look at that locally and see if they can free up time. I know certainly one occasion we went into one hospital and they'd suspended you know, their surgical list for the morning so they could all do the open disclosure training. Now, I don't know that that's something that would be easily happened at the minute with pre and past COVID and everything. So so it is very much a local thing to be addressed. I think protection time would be very good if we had that resource to do it. But just to prompt people that the online modules are there, you know, they're about 40-45 minutes. So it's a good introduction. But for those of you who may have to engage in the high level open disclosure discussions, the formal meetings, then we do you know, recommend, and it is actually mandatory for people who as part of the role have to do that they would attend the skills training as well. And I think if we've heard anything from your conversation today, Eva, we've heard about the importance of the skills and engaging in these conversations. Lorraine, did you want to come in with anything there yourself?
No, apologies, my internet went, but better mine than Eva, so.
If I can offer maybe before I think Lorraine's going to close up now, but if what I'm going to advocate to everyone is go and see how you can skill yourself up on the basic skills of communication that I've talked about, because if you have them, then you don't need different ones for open disclosure conversations. You just need to use those with greater emphasis. So however way you do that, I mean, the National Healthcare Communication Programme is in existence. It needs to grow and be a bigger presence in all the different healthcare organisations in the country. And hopefully that's what's going to happen, because it's absolutely excellent. And I'm only saying that because I've been involved. But yeah, but whatever way, go and read the book or whatever it is, but just get yourself skilled up on the skills of effective communication, because they're not intuitive. They're not the skills we've used since we were babies. They are different. And if you have them, then you can use them for anything.
Great, Eva, thank you. Just a question on the advice on cross-examination. Again, we were talking about when a solicitor comes into an open disclosure meeting, and it's not about the patient and the relevant person asking questions. It's really that meeting is not a legal meeting. So if a patient wants to have a solicitor there, it should be in a purely supportive capacity. But the meeting is not a legal meeting which allows a solicitor to cross-examine any of the staff members at that meeting. So it's not cross-examination by the patient and relevant person we're talking about, it's a legal cross-examination of people in the meeting. So as I said, reiterate, if a patient wants a solicitor at a meeting, it should be discussed with the team. You can get some legal advice locally on that from your local legal department. But if the solicitor is there to outline that you're very happy to have them there in a supportive capacity, you know, and make it clear that this is a meeting between the service provider and the patient and the relevant person, and it's not a legal meeting, so cross-examination of staff during that meeting will not be allowed. And so I hope that maybe clarifies that for you. Another question is open disclosure education in undergrad programs, and we can now safely say we did an analysis of the undergrad programs recently in relation to open disclosure being involved in the curriculum or included in the curriculum, and we've been back to, out of the 36 schools we actually contacted, which were, you know, medical, nursing, midwifery, allied healthcare professionals, psychology, dental. Open disclosure is now going to be in all of those schools. Out of the 36, it was in 33. The other 3 gave us reassurance that it would be included in the next curriculum. And we've just been in contact with those schools again over the last couple of weeks, and 2 of them have come back to say, yes, it is now included. So we anticipate that it'll be included in 100% of those curriculums. We're also looking at work in the postgraduate programs as well, and getting some data on the courses that include open disclosure in the postgrad programs, and also looking at the number of attendees at those programs also. So it really is getting very well embedded, you know, in our colleges. And as you can hear Eva there, the number, it comes into a lot of your programs that you run, Eva, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. The biggest thing there is that there needs to be the continuity into the workplace. There's a lot of very disappointing evidence out there in the world that if it's not, you know, reinforced in the workplace, actually the students lose those skills. And so yeah, so the problem is that we need the leaders to have this awareness and training as well, so that they are displaying these skills, so that when the students come on site, you know, they see, you know, whatever person they look up to using the skills explicitly, and they go, ooh, I was taught these, very good. But whereas if they don't see them, unfortunately they lose them pretty rapidly.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose in relation to people that are there, do get yourself into some face-to-face skills training for open disclosure if you do, as part of your role, have to engage in these discussions. And I mean, as Eva said, the skills are so important, and this is why in all the theory, you know, you want online, but sitting down and having a practice in our skills face-to-face workshops, we actually, you know, do role plays. We use case scenarios that are relevant to the area that you work in. We get you to, you know, engage in an open disclosure discussion, and then we do some reflection on that, looking at the key skills. And we take a lot of the learning from the National Healthcare Communication Programme actually for that. So we work very closely with that programme, Eva, and yourself too. So the skills are really important. And the other thing that's important about that face-to-face programme is that we do look at the whole staff support piece as well. And there's a real discussion about, you know, looking at the patient and family involved, also looking at the staff members involved, and how you might support that staff member and the team, because sometimes it's and very often it's more than one person, because an incident can affect the persons involved, the whole team. If it's a very high level, high profile incident, it affects the organisation and the whole of the HSE as well. So again, you know, looking at that wider staff support element is really important. So I think we've probably come to the end of our questions. It's the end of our time anyway. So I don't know, Lorraine, did you want to come in there at all before we finish up?
I was just going to say, I just see the link to the, sorry, Lorraine, I'm cutting across you again. I just see the link to the webinar next week. Some people have put it up in the chat. People want to take it as well.
That's wonderful. Sorry. Thank you. And Lorena, any finishing comments for yourself, or?
No, I suppose just listening to Eva as well, and just the message around how important communication is. And actually, when you look at the themes of patient safety incident, it does come up as a key factor always. And I think even in terms of empathy with the patients and service users afterwards, it's highly relevant. But even between teams in the earlier stages, you know, such a key factor preventing incidents from happening. So yeah, just to echo that again.
Thanks very much.
And huge thank yous to Eva and Bernie for your continued contributions, and Angela and the team for organising today's session. It's really fantastic.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and a great big thank you to all of our attendees, because, you know, these sessions are for you, and you know, our continuation of these sessions is based on what you need. So you know, when you do, you will receive an evaluation today, and it's really important if you can fill it in. It'll take about 2 minutes to fill it in. It's just a quick link in an email to you. And just as part of that evaluation, there is an opportunity for you to give us examples of maybe other topics you'd like us to cover in webinars that are coming up, because we do want to provide webinars that will be of interest to you and of benefit to you in your work every day. So just to highlight again our e-learning modules, to remind people that people working in HSE and HSE funded service, that it is mandatory training. So all staff must complete e-learning module 1 on HSE land, and that's communicating effectively through open disclosure, and it is CPD accredited and CEU accredited. E-learning module 2, I think it's beneficial for all staff to do this module, but certainly for staff who have to engage in the high-level disclosures, they must complete module 2 as well. And then our face-to-face program then is the third module, and that is the skills module we talked about. To access face-to-face, just contact the lead for your area, the open disclosure lead, and the name of the leads are on our website as well. Just in relation to future webinars, we haven't got a deal going with the Royal College of Surgeons, but just it happens that next month is a good month for Professor Kieran O'Boyle to join us. And he's the director for the Centre for Positive Psychology and Health at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. And he's going to be talking to us about resilience and staff care. So keeping that message going around the whole staff support and staff care element. So that's going to be a very exciting webinar as well. We'll be sending out some details about that to you all. When you join any of our webinars, you'll automatically go onto our mailing list. And if you don't want to be on a mailing list, if you get a communication from us, do just email us back and say you'd like to be removed from that. Just within the wider National Quality and Patient Safety Directorate and the QI talk times, there's a very interesting talk time coming up on the 21st of February from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. by Tom Foley, a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist who's going to be talking about building a learning health system. So again, maybe another date for your diary there. As I talked about the evaluation, so we really would be grateful if you could fill in the evaluations, and people are actually very good. For people who are seeking CPD, you do need to complete the evaluation because we are audited on that to make sure that people are actually filling in the evaluation before we are giving out the CPD certs. And Julia, I think we can just finish up there. Just thank you very much. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Lorraine, for your support for all of our webinars, and my own team in the Open Disclosure Office, and to Bernie again, who's just there. Bernie has worked solidly, and Patients for Patient Safety Ireland and our national patient representative groups and advocacy groups work so closely with us and have been really key in the implementation of the open disclosure policy on the ground. So big thank you to all of them as well. So have a good day, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.